Welcome to the Confident Grief Coach Show.
Hi, I am Pat Shevland, founder of the Confident Grief Coach School.
And I'm Cami Thielander, Advanced Certified Grief Coach and founder of Embodied Grief Support Coaching.
We believe as professionals, it is important to have a forum where we can gather as a community to really talk about all things body, mind, and spirit when it comes to grief.
We will be sharing stories, discussing thought-provoking ideas, and interviewing others who work in the field of grief and those who have the lived experience of creating lives of peace and purpose after experiencing deep loss.
Information about Cami's Embodied Grief Support Coaching Services or the Confident Grief Coach Certification Program can be found in our show notes below.
Thank you for joining us at the Confident Grief Coach Show. And if you like what you're hearing or would like us to focus on a specific topic in the future, please hit the like and subscribe button to stay connected. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Confident Grief Coach Show. And today I am really excited to have a conversation with Jacey Keller. She is a grief coach, and I'll let her do the introduction and share a little bit about what she does in her story, because she's doing some really amazing work in the world, and would love to share a little bit about her with you all. So, Jacey, yeah, would love, thanks for being here, first of all. Would love if you could just tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm a grief coach, and I find it so interesting that the recording happened to be this week because tomorrow is the 10-year mark since losing my mom. And so it's an honor to be able to just talk about grief and share a little bit about my story and hopefully help other people. I stepped into the coaching world in 2021. Um, and yeah, I wanted to use my experience to hopefully be the person that I once needed. I was 17 when I lost my mom, and there wasn't a lot of resources on parent laws and the grief that comes with that. And so I I was just like, you know what, there needs to be something there needs to be something about parent laws, and there needs to be resources. There needs to be all these different things so that teenagers or young adults that are going through something similar, they have a place to go to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think also being young, having lost a parent, I can definitely attest to the lack of resources at that time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago tomorrow, wow, that's a big anniversary that's coming up for you. So, yeah, I'm curious, like, if you'd be comfortable sharing a little bit about your story and your experiences. And of course, your mom having passed being a big influence on why you do this work, and to give people what you needed when you were young going through all of this. So if you're
Mhm.
comfortable, whatever you'd like to share as far as your background and your grief experiences in your story, and yeah, and how it's come to be 10 years since all of that happening, and the gifts that you're able to bring to people now.
Yeah. So my mom was diagnosed with colon cancer. She was 30. I think she was 30 when she was diagnosed. And then, for 6 years, it was like doctor's appointments, surgeries, and then uh, chemo and radiation, and so our childhood was, it was normal for the most part. And then when I was 11 is when it started to change. Like it was like it revolved around making trips to the hospital, which was about 45 minutes away. And then I'm just trying to navigate like having a mom who was sick and trying to just trying to balance like going to school, being I'm the oldest of my siblings, and taking care of my siblings, and just trying to, and navigating like being a teenager alone is really hard. And so I was like, I don't know, I felt like I was in survival mode for a really long time. Um, yeah, and then my senior year of high school, she was in the hospital in January, and that was when, the doctor came in and was like, yeah, she probably has about 6 months left. And so I remember when we were in the hospital with her, we were standing next to her bed, and my dad was like, we should probably do one last like family thing together, and like, what would you guys like to do? And so we were trying to like decide, and it was also kind of hard because she really wasn't able to do a lot. By that point she couldn't walk. She um yeah, her quality of life was not great at all. And so we were just trying to come up with something, and then a few weeks later we were at home. I remember it was a Sunday, and we were at church and she had been taken from home to hospice in the town that was like 45 minutes away. And I get home from church, and my dad's home, my siblings are home, and they were just crying, and I was like, what is going on? Like, what happened? And they told me what was happening, and I was pretty confused. I was like, wait, like, hold on, like, no, that's not right. I was kind of in denial, like, you guys are overreacting, like, that's not what's really going on. um and sure enough, like, I came to grips with reality, I guess. And then that whole week when she was in hospice was honestly a blur. Like, I I remember bits and pieces, but not a lot. It was definitely just like, I think we were all just trying to survive. Like, we were all just trying to like make it to the next day, and like trying to, not even the next day, like the next hour, the next minute, like knowing that she was going to be taking her last breath soon.
Mhm.
Um, and and sure enough, uh, 5 days later, she ended up passing away on Valentine's Day. And it was, I us kids, we weren't there when she took her last breath. That was one thing that my mom did not want. She was like, I don't want my kids here. Um, which I totally understand. That'd be really hard. And um, yeah, I remember we got the call, and it was like a relief, honestly. And I remember in the moment, like, I felt really guilty for feeling that way. Like, wow, like, I should be like, of course I'm sad, but like, I feel relieved at the same time. Like this burden had been lifted. Um, and I didn't quite know what to do with that. I was like, well, this is not what I was expecting. Um, and as we know, grief it's it's interesting. It's kind of weird sometimes. I like to look at it as like, you have grief, and then you have all of these different emotions that come from grief. Like, it's, you know, they're all wrapped up in grief, and it's so different for everyone. Um, but yeah, kind of the same. I think we all experience the same emotions, but they might happen at different times, and there's different triggers for each one. And so me and my siblings, we each had our own reaction, and we were each grieving differently and needed different things. And of course we didn't know that at the time. We just weren't aware. So yeah, and then after that, it was still survival mode. It just looked different. It was like, okay, I need to like get graduated. I need to, focus on these different things. And my dad was working and now a single parent. He was working full time and had 5 kids to take care of. And so there was a lot of times where, I had to be the chauffeur for my siblings because they couldn't drive yet, and I had to do some cooking, which, was like mac and cheese most of the time. um and yeah, trying to make sure that they got their homework done, that we all got our chores done. And yeah, so yeah, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but yeah, there's a little bit of my background for, that time period when my mom passed.
Mm. Thanks for sharing all of that. I mean, it's interesting when someone is sick. You mentioned that she was sick for like 6 years. So
Mhm,
it's like
mhm,
we have this understanding, of course, that like our person is sick and their health is declining, and that changes and has a sense of like almost like a normalcy when it's spread out that long.
mhm,
So you just kind of get used to it. And then, like you said, it's like when all of a sudden there was a change and she was going to hospice, then you started to realize, like, okay, the end is nearing, like things are progressing. She's going into
mhm,
hospice now. And then it took 5 days. She was in hospice for
mhm,
like a week.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that transition happening really quickly and kind of like a
Mhm,
surprise because you
mhm.
were used to this reality of mom being sick with cancer. And now it's like,
Yep.
here all of a sudden it happens and this transition happens, and now it's a whole different kind of survival mode and a whole different kind of navigating grief.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there was a lot of grief, while she was sick. We didn't know that. Like, we didn't realize it. I didn't notice that until like a couple years ago, and I was like, wow, I was really grieving like the loss of having a healthy mom, because we had that before, and then she was sick, and then, had all of these appointments and things that she had to do. And yeah, so for 6 years we had to get used to this like new normal of having a sick mom, and so we were grieving the healthy mom that we once had. And then you get used to, going to the hospital, going um and like taking her to her treatments, um and yeah, like you get used to that. And then when she died, it was like, oh, like we don't have that anymore. So now we have to like figure it out again and try to navigate what this looks like. And then you're grieving the mom that you lost who is sick. And so, yeah, there was a lot of like transitions in grief, is probably how I would define it. Is like you go from grieving this to grieving, the healthy mom, and then the sick mom, and then now you have no mom. And so, yeah, it was definitely, there was a lot of grief in all of it. Yeah.
Mhm. And the life changes that come with all of that. I mean, being a
Mhm.
teenager, first of all, is hard enough. And
Mhm.
being the oldest of 5 kids and that responsibility of being the big sister to everyone,
Mhm.
and then taking on that responsibility, especially after your mom passed, how that changed things for you and your freedom and your ability to, have your own life now, taking care of like your family and taking on that responsibility of cooking and cleaning and being the chauffeur and some of those things to help your dad out.
Mhm. Mhm.
That was something that I experienced too. When my stepdad died at 15, it was like, I mean, there was my mom and my sister and I, and I felt that sense of responsibility, like, okay, like I need to like, what can I do? I remember just like
Mhm.
wanting to do something, wanting to have some kind of control when everything else just felt like out of control, being able to do something productive by,
Mhm.
going to the grocery store, by cleaning the house felt good for me because I felt like I was able to provide in some way. And I'm curious what
Mhm.
your experience was like. Of course, like after your mom died, in that transitional time of your experience as a 17-year-old, a senior in high school, like
Mhm.
what was that like now? Like being 17 in school, trying to adjust to this, having your family, having these responsibilities? How did you do that?
I like I said, I was definitely in survival mode, and there are parts where I don't remember. Um, but yeah, I mean, I had to, because I didn't have the tools that I have now, I distracted myself with whatever I could. Food was a big part. Like, I thought it would make me feel better, and so I'm like, well, like, I like food. I'm going to eat as much as I want of it because that's something that I have control over.
Mm,
So yeah, like, that was definitely one of the ways that I tried to cope.
mm,
And um I I was just trying to get to graduation so then I could leave, thinking it would, I don't know, thinking I could, like, leave the pain and the loss behind, and, like, if I was at college, then I wouldn't have to think about it. Um, so yeah, a lot of just trying to survive because I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the tools, and not to say that, there weren't resources available. It's just that I didn't know about them.
yeah,
Um, and I don't think people really knew how to help, and that's no fault of theirs. It's just that's just how it was.
mhm,
And so I had to just kind of figure it out. And I had truly an amazing support system. I really did. Like, I feel really blessed because I had a couple of amazing friends who really showed up,
mm,
and I had um, I had my siblings. We That's something that will keep us connected forever. Um, yeah, I I guess I don't know how I made it through. I look back and I'm like, how did I do that? Honestly, it was just survival. I was just trying to survive. I made it to college. And honestly, at college, it got worse. The grief, I feel like it just compounded. And I felt it even more because not only did I not have my mom, I didn't have anyone. Like, it was me in this new state, um, in a new town that I had never lived in before, and I wasn't super familiar with it. And I yeah, I don't know. I didn't go to class. I was battling insomnia,
mm,
and I was failing my classes. I lost my job. I And so it all just kind of, like, came to a head.
mm,
And then, let's see, it was June or May of 2015. I finally realized, that I had been trying to, like, run from it for so long that it it wasn't working. Like, I wasn't getting where I wanted to be.
mm,
And I started doing, just started taking baby steps. I started going on walks. Um, I had always been pretty fit, and I like to work out and stuff. And I lost that when I was at college. Like, I tried, but I was not in a great place mentally to keep up with it. It
mm,
wasn't sustainable. And so I started going on walks, and that was the first thing that, like, that really, I guess, it was the thing that really helped me face my grief,
mm,
and it helped me to be more present with myself. And I noticed that, like, the more that I did that, the better I felt.
Mm.
And then after that, it was like, oh, maybe I should, drink a little more water. And so I started to, eat healthier and drink more water. And I was like, I feel really good. Like,
Mm.
I feel, I mean, I felt the grief on like a deeper level, but I think it's because I was allowing it to be there. And because of that, I was able to feel better at the same time. And and so yeah, so it just kind of like started there, and then I started making other changes. I moved back home, and then I um, got a different job. All these different things, and it really helped. Um, so yeah, I think that's how I made it through like those early times in my throes of grief.
Mhm. Yeah, and, like, when we're thrown into that, it's like you mentioned that survival mode, it's like there's
Mhm.
not much of a capacity to really do things, right? It's
Right.
like you're just kind of
Mhm.
taking it one day at a time, and then it's like, all of a sudden, then we get to this point where it's like, that's not working anymore. Like, I'm
Mhm.
maybe starting to transition out of that survival mode and wanting to engage with life more, wanting to be present, wanting to have these feelings, wanting to feel healthy, wanting to go to class and sleep well and all these things. And it's like survival
Mhm.
mode isn't serving you in that place anymore. It served you when you were so fresh in your loss and you needed to
Right.
distract and kind of numb out and to not feel, not remember. Like,
Mhm.
thanks for that, body. Thank you for doing that and protecting me in that
Right.
way, but then it was like it sounds like after some time went on, it was like, you can't be in that place forever, you can't distract yourself
Mhm.
forever. Um,
Mhm.
I had a similar experience too, being 15 and just needing to get through high school so I could get to college because somehow I thought that that would, like, yeah, a new scenery, a new change of pace, and yeah,
Mhm.
my grief got worse also when I got to college, and that's when I started going super downhill.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what like, was there something that happened that, like, helped you to realize that you were at that turning point of, like, needing to make changes? Like for me, my body was like I was experiencing a lot of physical issues. My grief was manifesting
Mhm.
really physically for me, and that was a clue.
Mhm.
My body was like, just like you, okay, start to take care of yourself more, do some movement, drink more water, eat healthy, some of
Yeah.
these basic needs that we need to like reestablish again. That was very
Mhm.
much the beginning of my journey through change and transforming my grief. And I'm curious, like, was there a point that you remember like realizing that you needed to like do something again, go for walks, drink more water?
Mhm. That's a really good question. I don't remember if there was, like, a specific time where I was like, "Oh, I need to do this, like, this is the answer." I think I just wanted to feel like myself again, and I thought back to, like, okay, what did my old self do? Um, and I exercised every day, like, I had a a weightlifting class, a weight training class, and I had sports, I was in tennis, and I just remember thinking like, my old self did that, and if I wanna feel like myself again,
Mm,
maybe I can try that. And and I've always I don't know, I've always, like, taken care of myself, like, taking like, being healthy and eating healthy foods and exercising. And so I just thought, like, it was a free way for me to try feeling like my old self again. And that's what I really wanted. I just wanted to feel like me because I truly, for a while, I did not feel like me. I felt like I was just living in, I don't know, like it felt like it wasn't even real.
mm,
And so I just, yeah, I was like, how can I feel again? Like, how can I feel alive? How can I get back to myself? Because I felt really lost in
mm,
all of it. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah, and like you said, like, previously it sounds like you really did take care of yourself. You know, you exercised, you ate healthy, and a lot of those things, then it was like that relationship with yourself and with your well-being totally shifted with grief. Having your
Mhm.
relationship with food change, sleep and exercise and all these things that grief just kind of like choked out, like didn't allow us that space or that opportunity to take care of ourselves in that way anymore. And you
Mhm.
lost that, and that was a big part of your routine and a big part of what made you, you know, who you are and how you took care of yourself on a day-to-day basis. And it was like, you know, realizing that that was something that you could do, that you knew how to do, that
Mhm.
helped to keep you a little bit, um, yeah, feeling like yourself again in your routines and your stability, and that it was something accessible that you could start like right away, going for walks and drinking more water. It was free. You knew that you exercise was good for you. You knew you liked to eat well, and it was like, okay, let's do that again.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then that opened up this, like you said, like you started to feel your grief in a deeper way. You stopped running from it and started being present with yourself. And that's really when you started to feel better, was like, yes, you still had your grief, but now you
Mhm.
were spending time with it and you were getting to know yourself again in your grief and what that looked like for you now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that, like I said before, the more that I was able to like connect with myself maybe, and to just to start taking care of myself again, it really allowed space for the grief to exist.
Mm,
And I think that's all it needed. Like, it just needed a space to exist and not be pushed away or forced out.
mm,
Because, I mean, we both know that it's not going anywhere, right? Like, the grief, it it stays with you. And I think, throughout your life, it will look different.
mm.
Um, the you know, with the different experiences that you have and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, creating space for it to exist.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like, I think it seems so simple. Not easy, but simple. Like, just
Right.
let the grief be there. Be present with it,
Mhm.
spend time with it, like, get back to basics, taking care of yourself, having the space to have your feelings.
Mhm.
Knowing that, okay, like, it's not going anywhere, running away from it isn't working, so I'm just gonna sit with it.
Mhm.
It's like
Mhm.
sometimes that's really all we have to do, is give ourselves that permission to stop and feel and
Mhm.
be with ourselves instead of trying to seek externally for something that's going to make it better, because it's
Mhm.
like, okay, we can't make it better. Like, your mom died. Like, there's literally
Mhm.
nothing that could make this better. So
Right.
how do we now integrate that and get back to ourselves, create a new version of this life, figure things out, you know, make these changes
Mhm.
and these decisions with what you have. And being with the grief and letting it exist was like that turning point for you, it sounds like, of like, okay, I'm taking care of myself now, and this is a part of that. I gotta figure out what it means to have that space to be with my grief and let it exist.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I know you wanted to touch on abandonment, a little bit. I I think the more that, like, well, let me start here. So, I think it's normal and natural for people to feel abandoned and grief, um, and feel abandoned by, their parent that passed away or their support system or, whatever it is. And I think it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking about, you know, sometimes we abandon ourselves
Mm,
in grief. And when we can realize that and like realize that we really need ourselves and that we are responsible for like taking care of ourselves and our healing and that kind of stuff, like then we come back, like it's like finding home again. It's like coming back to yourself. And I think it can help with that abandonment or abandoned feeling. Um, yeah. So as you were talking, I had that thought and I wanted to kind of touch on that.
I love that. Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that. Like, we do lose ourselves and our connection to ourselves. It's like everything changes and we don't want to be here experiencing this. And it's easy to just like dissociate from that
Mhm.
reality. But in doing
Mhm.
so, it's like we are losing that connection with ourselves.
Mhm.
And that, I mean, that's giving away our power, right? It's like when we can learn how to take care of ourselves in a new way, even through something as tragic as losing a parent and going through
Mhm.
everything that you've been through. It's like when we can practice coming home to ourselves, then that's when we can step into our power and make these decisions to take care of ourselves and make these changes that we want to see for our lives. But
Mhm.
if we're not there, then how can we operate from that space? How can we change
Mhm.
our lives if we're not here presently for our lives anyway to begin with?
Right.
Um, and that's something like for me, my dad died when I was 11, so being younger, I definitely internalized those stories of
Mhm.
I'm not good
Mhm.
enough, my dad's leaving me because I'm a bad daughter, what did I
Mhm.
do wrong? I really took it personally and
Mhm.
felt a sense of shame and unworthiness that came with the abandonment.
Mhm.
So that impacted me in many ways, especially in relationships. And
Yeah.
that's something that has been coming up for me more and more now,
Mhm.
years later, now that I'm in like a safe partnership with a man, it's like all of these triggers of this abandonment is coming up for me again. And as I'm exploring the grief that comes with that and feeling my way into this new situation of having, a relationship that's solid,
Mhm.
um, how these stories are coming up for me and they're making themselves known and they want to exist. They want to express
Mhm.
their fear and they want to express all these ways in which I don't feel safe in a relationship that feels solid, even though I know consciously that's what I want. I know
Mhm.
that I'm safe. I know that like I don't need to be afraid of abandonment, but that inner child in me is like freaking out.
Mhm.
And as I've
Mhm.
been working through some of this, at the core of that healing process for me very much has been, how do I stop abandoning myself? How do I
Mhm.
come back to myself and keep showing up for myself no matter what other people choose to do? No matter if I'm not with my partner, no matter if, a parent
Mhm.
dies, like how can
Mhm.
I reframe this relationship with myself so that no matter what, I know that I got me. And at the end of the
Yeah.
day, like that's all I'm in control about. Like that's all that I can really do for myself because we can't control the world or what other people do.
Mhm.
So every time I get triggered and every time those fears come up and every time those relationship things surface for me, that's been what I need to remind myself to come back to is like, okay,
Mhm.
like this is a protective mechanism because I'm afraid of this loss. And instead of people pleasing or dissociating or distracting or doing something to try to not feel this way, what if I felt into it and just held myself through it anyways?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's hard.
Yeah. 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 No, I can totally relate to what you were feeling. Especially with the people pleasing part. I think for me, I was definitely a huge people pleaser because I thought like, okay, if I can make this person happy, then they won't leave me, right? And then I'll be safe.
Yeah.
Um, which just isn't true. It's not true. And a question that I like to think about is like, okay, if I am saying yes to this, what am I saying no to?
Mm,
And so I had to think like, okay, if I'm saying yes to this thing just to please them and make them happy, what am I saying no to?
mhm,
I'm saying no to me. And I'm saying no to my healing. I'm saying no to, having my own back.
mm,
And that part, it's really hard because it's so much easier to just people please and be like, "Oh, yeah, like, I'm gonna do whatever I can to make everyone else happy,"
Yeah.
right? But then you just end up more miserable on the inside.
Right, because somehow making other people like people pleasing is
Mhm,
keeping us safe because we think we're in control of them leaving. We're afraid of
mhm,
loss.
mhm,
There's that fear of abandonment that's underneath those actions that probably are happening subconsciously. And that was a big thing for me was like, why am I acting this way in relationship? Why do these fears and these anxieties keep showing up for me in this way? And when I
mhm,
could really be present and have an awareness and start to dig into what was actually underneath that was very much a fear of loss, a fear of abandonment, a fear of people leaving. And in order to
mhm,
try to control that and avoid experiencing that deep grief ever again, I'm going to do whatever I can, even if it means totally abandoning myself in
mhm,
order to try to keep this person around.
mhm,
And
mhm,
that's a dangerous cycle to fall into.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's more common
Mhm.
than people realize. And a lot of people aren't totally aware of it. They're not aware of what's happening. They're not aware of um, the people pleasing, even, and the abandonment I mean, that they're ultimately creating. But yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow, yeah, that's powerful. And like you said, that awareness of being present with it and connecting with yourself and creating those spaces where you can have your grief and explore this stuff. Like that's really what's at the core of this whole process to be able to
Mhm,
understand like when those things come up for you, when you're experiencing that, when these patterns or these behaviors are coming through, like what is underneath that? And that's not
mhm,
always easy to figure out. And like you said, it's really common for a lot of people who have experienced grief and loss to be
mhm,
to have those fears operate in the background and control our lives in some way because we're not able to really be present for it and we're not able to really, decide now, how to move forward from that, how to heal that, how to come back to ourselves because it's
mhm,
freaking scary.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, it is. I I have it written down in my notebook, and it's healing in grief is the practice of presence. Like the more that you can practice to be present with yourself and what you're feeling, and all of these heavy and scary emotions, like that's where healing comes from, is through the practice of presence. And it is a practice. It's a skill that anyone can build. Um, and especially for that abandonment, I think the more that you can practice processing it, feeling it, being present with it, the more you heal it,
Mm,
and the more in control you are of your own life and the decisions that you're making.
mm, that's powerful. Yeah, and having a coach who can understand that and speak from experience and to help guide you through that process and help you find those tools to be present can
Mhm.
be so helpful in that process because doing that alone is really tough. It's
Yeah.
really tough to I mean, it's new territory. It's stepping into this unknown of, okay, well, what does it mean now to come home to myself and to stop abandoning myself when I've been doing this my whole life
Mhm.
subconsciously?
Mhm.
I know for
Yeah.
me that's been a really tough change to make in my life and definitely helpful to have other people who can help you gain that presence and practice being
Mhm.
with that deep wound and all the emotions that come with it and practicing, creating this new life, these new patterns, this new behavior, this new reality
Yeah.
that's healing and showing up for yourself and tending to this wound and all the things that come with grief.
Yeah.
So, JC, how can people get a hold of you if they, if they're experiencing some of this and really resonated with your story and would
Mhm.
like to work with you or reach out, like how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm on Facebook. I have my page on Facebook. It's Jacey Keller Coaching. I'm on Instagram at rebuildyourlife.griefcoach. Um, yeah, and I'm or email, but mostly like Facebook. Just through Messenger is perfect, or through a DM on Instagram is great. I'm on both of them, and I respond pretty fast.
Cool. I'll link those in the notes below so people will have access to that. Um, and something else, another opportunity, just to share with the world is that Jacey and I will be hosting a grief retreat on Flathead Lake in Montana in September. So if anyone out there is interested in hanging out with us and maybe you need some support working through feelings of abandonment or practicing presence through grief and really looking to make some changes to heal and support yourself in that journey, then we're going to be having a beautiful long weekend in a cabin in community, doing lots of yoga and artistic expression and having a lot of opportunities to make these changes and to take steps in a new direction. So we will include some information on that as well. Feel free to reach out to either of us if you want more details on that. But thank you so much, Jacey. Thanks for this conversation and for being vulnerable and sharing your story. And I know there's a lot of people out there who, especially people like us who have gone through a parent loss and have the grief of just that whole process of, the illness to navigating life after the transition and the responsibilities that come with that and doing all of that from a young age as well. So thanks for normalizing all of that and diving deep into conversation with all of that. I'm curious if you're doing anything for your mom tomorrow for Valentine's Day.
Oh, good question. Yeah, actually, I don't do anything. I don't really, I don't like. I don't know. I don't really do anything. I don't go visit at the cemetery. I live 2 hours away from it. Yeah, no, I just think about her a lot, and I'll make a post on Facebook, and that's pretty much the extent of it. Um, yeah, yeah. So I'll just honor her by living my life and raising my boys and being present.
I love that. Yeah, it doesn't need to be extravagant for it to be meaningful, taking those moments to connect with her and remember her and be present for your own life. That's really beautiful. Thanks
Thank you.
again, JC.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll link the information to get in contact with JC or to learn more about our grief retreat coming up here. So thanks for tuning in.